The cowboy who lived at the edge of Prescott, Arizona territory, hadn't spoken more than 3 words to another living soul in 2 years. But tonight he sat frozen on his porch, watching a woman with dirt on her face and determination in her eyes settle herself into the rocking chair he'd built for a ghost. James Sullivan had carved those chairs from ponderosa pine in the winter of 1883, his hands working the wood while his mind wrestled with memories he couldn't shake. The first chair was his, the one where he sat each evening watching the sun bleed out across the Bradshaw Mountains. The second chair, the one with the slightly higher back and the armrests he'd sanded smooth as creek stones, that chair had sat empty for 24 months. He'd built it in a fever of hope and grief, thinking maybe if he made something beautiful enough, permanent enough, she might come back. But Rebecca never came back from that fever that took her, and the chair remained as empty as the space beside him in bed. Now a stranger sat in Rebecca's chair, and James didn't know whether to feel outraged or relieved. The woman was younger than Rebecca had been, maybe 23 to his 27 years, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and freckles scattered across her nose like constellation. Her dress was torn at the hem, and she had the look of someone who'd been running from something. She wasn't rocking, just sitting there with her hands gripped tight on the armrests, her chest heaving with exhaustion. "I didn't invite you to sit there," James said finally, his voice rough from disuse. "I didn't ask," she replied, turning those green eyes on him. "Your horse is lame." "Back left leg, probably stepped in a prairie dog hole about 3 miles south of here." James set down the tin cup he'd been holding. "What? Your bay mare. I passed her on the road. She's favoring that leg something fierce. You should bring her in before a mountain lion decides she's easy supper." He stood up so fast his own chair rocked violently behind him. "Copper, you saw Copper, if that's the bay's name, then yes. Like I said, 3 miles south, maybe less, near that stand of juniper by the dried creek bed." She leaned her head back against the chair, closing her eyes. "I would have brought her in myself, but I've been walking since dawn and my feet have made their complaints known." James grabbed his hat from the porch rail, then hesitated. "You'll be here when I get back," one eye opened. "Unless you want me to steal whatever food you have inside and disappear into the night, yes, I'll be here." "Don't touch anything," he said, and took off at a run toward the small barn behind the house. His gelding, Ace, was already nickering anxiously, as if he knew something was wrong with his pasture mate. James saddled him in record time and rode out into the growing darkness, his heart hammering. Copper had been Rebecca's horse, the one thing of hers he still had that breathed and moved and needed him. He found the mare exactly where the woman had said she'd be, standing 3-legged near a juniper, her head low with pain. James dismounted and ran his hands down her leg, feeling the heat and swelling above the fetlock. Not broken, thank God, but badly strained. He fashioned a lead from his rope and walked both horses back slowly, Copper limping beside Ace while James's mind spun with questions about the stranger on his porch. It took nearly an hour to get back. He settled Copper in her stall with fresh water and a poultice he kept for injuries, then walked back to the house expecting to find the woman gone and his pantry raided. Instead, she was asleep in Rebecca's chair, her head tilted to one side, her breathing deep and even. In the lamplight from inside the house, he could see the exhaustion written in every line of her body. There was a bruise on her wrist, dark and finger-shaped, and her knuckles were scraped raw. James stood there for a long moment, studying her. She was pretty in a wild, unkempt sort of way, all sharp angles and soft curves mixed together. Her lips were cracked from the sun, and there was a sunburn across her cheekbones. Whatever she'd been running from, she'd been running hard. He went inside and came back out with a blanket, draping it over her carefully. She stirred but didn't wake, just pulled the blanket closer with a small sound of contentment. James returned to his own chair and sat down, rocking slowly, watching her sleep and wondering what the hell he was supposed to do now. The desert night grew cold the way it always did, stars emerging like silver dust across black velvet. James knew he should wake her, get her inside to the spare room, but something kept him in his chair, rocking and watching and thinking about how strange it was that grief could be a constant companion, until the moment it suddenly wasn't. When dawn broke pink and gold across the mountains, James woke with a start, realizing he'd fallen asleep in his chair. His neck ached and his back protested, but the woman in Rebecca's chair was still there, awake now, watching him with those sharp green eyes. "Thank you for the blanket," she said. "Common decency," he replied, rolling his shoulders. "You want to tell me why you're here? Here as in your porch or here as in Prescott?" "Both." She folded the blanket carefully, setting it across her lap. "My name is Catherine Ward, Kate. I was supposed to marry a man named Gerald Hutchins 3 days ago in Phoenix. I decided I'd rather die in the desert than spend one night as his wife, so I ran. I've been walking north ever since." James studied her face, looking for deception and finding only weary honesty. "He hurt you." Kate glanced down at her wrist, pulling her sleeve over the bruise. "He was going to do a lot worse than that. I overheard him talking to his brother the night before the wedding. They had plans for me for my father's ranch. They were going to kill my father and make it look like bandits. Take everything. I wasn't a bride to them, I was just a means to property. Your father know you ran. My father's the one who arranged the marriage. He thinks Gerald Hutchins is a respectable businessman." Her voice turned bitter. "He wouldn't believe me when I tried to tell him what I'd heard. Said I was having wedding jitters, being hysterical, so I left." James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "They'll come looking for you, I know. Prescott's not that big, they'll find you eventually. I know that too." Kate met his eyes steadily. "But I'm not going back. I'll die first, and I mean that." There was steel in her voice that reminded James of Rebecca, who'd had that same stubborn set to her jaw when she'd decided something. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You got any skills besides knowing when horses are lame?" "I can shoot. I can ride. I can cook better than most men I've met, which isn't saying much. I can read and write and do figures. I helped my father run our ranch for 5 years before he decided I needed a husband more than he needed a partner." The anger in her voice was sharp as glass. "I can mend fences, birth calves, treat snake bites, and I once tracked a mountain lion for 3 days before I got a clean shot." "You're hired," James said. Kate blinked. "What? I need help around here. Had a ranch hand quit on me last month, haven't found a replacement. Can't pay much, but room and board are included. You can stay in the spare room. Work for me, and if anyone comes looking for a runaway bride, you're just my hired hand." He stood up, stretching. "Far as I'm concerned, Kate Ward just showed up looking for work, and I gave it to her. Anything before that is none of my business." Her eyes had gone wide and suspiciously bright. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "No, but I know what it's like to feel trapped." James picked up his hat. "And I know you saved my horse, that counts for something, so you want the job or not." Kate stood up too, the blanket falling to the chair. She stuck out her hand. "I want the job." Her grip was firm when he shook her hand, her palm calloused from work. James nodded once, then released her. "Come on then, I'll show you where everything is, and then we've got work to do. This ranch doesn't run itself." He led her inside the small house, acutely aware that no woman had crossed this threshold since Rebecca died. The place was neat enough but sparse, all the softness gone. Rebecca's curtains still hung in the windows, but the little touches she'd added, the flowers, the colorful quilts, the pictures on the walls, most of that had been packed away because looking at them hurt too much. "Spare rooms through there," James said, pointing to a door off the main room. "There's a bed, dresser, not much else. We share the kitchen and the washroom. I'll expect you up at dawn. We've got 30 head of cattle, a dozen horses, chickens, and a vegetable garden that's barely hanging on. Water's precious out here, so we don't waste it." Kate walked through the house slowly, taking it all in. She paused at the mantel where a single photograph sat in a silver frame, a woman with dark hair and a gentle smile. "Is this your wife?" James said shortly. "She died 2 years ago. I'm sorry." Kate's voice was soft. The empty chair, it was hers. Yeah. I'll use a different chair tonight. No. The word came out harder than he meant it. James softened his tone. No, it's fine. Maybe it's time someone sat in it. Kate looked at him for a long moment, something complicated passing across her face. Then she nodded and went into the spare room, closing the door behind her. James stood in his empty house and wondered what the hell he'd just done. The first week was awkward, both of them dancing around each other like cautious animals. Kate proved she hadn't been lying about her skills. She could work from sunup to sundown without complaint, hefting feed sacks and repairing fence posts with the kind of steady competence that came from real experience. She was good with the horses too, patient and firm, and within 3 days she had even nervous Copper eating from her hand. James found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the way she pushed her hair back from her face when she was concentrating, the way she talked to the animals like they could understand her, the way she laughed when one of the barn cats brought her a dead mouse like an offering. She never asked about Rebecca, and he never offered information. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, speaking only when necessary. But in the evenings, after the work was done and they'd eaten whatever simple supper one of them had thrown together, they sat in those 2 rocking chairs on the porch, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. Kate told him about growing up on her father's ranch, about her mother who died when she was 12, about learning to be both son and daughter to a man who needed her but would never admit it. She told him about Gerald Hutchins, how charming he'd been at first, how her father had been dazzled by his money and connections, how she'd felt the trap closing around her like jaws. James told her about Rebecca, about meeting her at a church social in town, about how she'd been a schoolteacher with soft hands and big dreams. He told her about the fever that came on sudden and mean, about how he'd ridden through a storm to fetch the doctor but it was already too late, about how the house had felt like a tomb ever since. You loved her, Kate said one evening, rocking slowly in the chair. I did, James agreed. Still do, I suppose. Don't know if that ever really stops. No, Kate said quietly. I don't suppose it does. They fell silent after that, rocking in rhythm with each other, watching the stars come out one by one. It was in the 3rd week that the trouble came. James was in town picking up supplies when he heard a man asking questions at the general store. Tall, well-dressed, with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. He was describing a woman, auburn hair, green eyes, freckles across her nose. Said she was his fiancée, that she'd run off in a fit of nerves, that her poor father was worried sick, Gerald Hutchins. James knew it without having to ask. He finished his business quickly and rode back to the ranch at a gallop, his heart in his throat. He found Kate in the barn mucking out stalls, and the look on his face must have told her everything she needed to know. He's here, she said, not a question, in town, asking questions. Kate leaned on the pitchfork, her knuckles white. How long do I have? Someone will talk eventually. Everyone knows I hired a woman. Probably a day, maybe 2 if we're lucky. Then I'll leave tonight. I can head north, maybe make it to Flagstaff before he catches my trail again. No, James stepped closer, surprising himself with the intensity in his voice. You're not running anymore. James, you don't understand. Gerald's got money and connections. If he finds me here, if he knows you helped me, he'll ruin you. He'll trump up charges, get the law involved, make your life hell just because he can. Let him try. James took the pitchfork from her hands, set it aside. Kate, listen to me. I've been half alive for 2 years, going through motions, existing but not living. Then you showed up and sat in that chair, and for the first time since Rebecca died, I felt something besides grief. I felt alive. I felt like maybe there was a point to getting up in the morning besides just surviving another day. Kate's eyes had gone wide. James, I'm not saying this right. He took off his hat, twisted it in his hands. What I mean is, you don't have to run anymore. Stay here. Let me help you. We'll face this together. Why? Why would you risk everything for me? Because I'm tired of being alone, he said simply. Because you're brave and strong and you deserve better than to spend your life running from a man who thinks he can own you. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for." The words hung between them, honest and raw. Kate's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you saved my horse. I know you work harder than any ranch hand I've ever hired. I know you're kind to animals and you laugh at terrible jokes and you're not afraid of anything except losing your freedom. That's enough for me." Kate looked at him for a long moment, and James could see her thinking, weighing, deciding. Then she stepped forward and kissed him. It was brief, just a brush of lips, but it sent electricity through his whole body. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. "I'm staying," she said. "But if this goes wrong, if Gerald comes here with the law or with violence, you let me handle it. I won't have you hurt because of me." "We handle it together," James said. "That's the deal." She smiled, and it transformed her whole face. "Together, then." They didn't have long to prepare. The next afternoon, a group of riders came up the road, 5 men on horseback with Gerald Hutchins at the head of them. James saw them from the porch and called to Kate, who came out of the house wiping her hands on a towel. "That's him," she said quietly. "The one in front." James could see what had attracted Kate's father to the match. Gerald Hutchins was handsome in a polished way, well-dressed and well-groomed, sitting his horse like a man used to being in charge. But there was something cold about him, something cruel in the set of his mouth. The riders stopped at the porch, and Gerald tipped his hat. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for Catherine Ward. I have reason to believe she's been seen in this area." "Don't know anyone by that name," James said evenly. Gerald's eyes flicked to Kate, who stood beside James with her chin up and her shoulders back. "Catherine, darling, your father's been worried sick. It's time to come home. My name is Kate Ward, and this is my home now. I work here. Don't be ridiculous. You're my fiancé. We have a wedding to finish." Gerald's voice was smooth, reasonable, but his eyes were hard. "Now stop this foolishness and get your things. I'm not your fiancé. I'm not your anything. The wedding is off, Gerald. Go back to Phoenix and find someone else to swindle." His mask slipped for just a moment, showing the ugliness beneath. "You overheard that conversation. Every word, about killing my father, taking the ranch, everything. Did you really think I'd just stand there and let it happen?" One of the men with Gerald shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. James caught the movement and his own hand dropped to his holster. "I'd think twice about that if I were you. This is my property and you're not welcome here." Gerald held up a hand, stopping his man. "Mr. Sullivan, is it? I don't know what lies Catherine has been filling your head with, but I assure you she's a disturbed young woman. Her father is quite concerned about her mental state. I have the legal right to take her back to her family. She's an adult and she's made her choice. Unless you've got a court order saying otherwise, she stays here. I could get one. Then get one. Until you do, ride off my property." The tension was thick enough to cut. Gerald stared at James, then at Kate, calculating. Finally, he smiled that cold smile again. "Catherine, if you don't come with me now, I'll make sure your father loses everything. I have debts he owes me, promissory notes with his signature. I can call them in tomorrow and he'll be ruined. Is that what you want?" Kate's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "My father made his choices. He chose to believe you over me. I'm done protecting him from himself. Then his ruin is on your conscience." Gerald pulled his horse's head around. "You'll regret this, Catherine. Both of you will." They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving James and Kate standing on the porch. Kate's hands were shaking, and James took one gently in his. "You okay?" "He's going to destroy my father." "Your father is a grown man who made his own choices, just like you said. You can't set yourself on fire to keep him warm." "I know, but—" her voice broke. "He's still my father." James pulled her into his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, she let herself lean into him. He could feel her trembling. "We'll figure it out," he said into her hair. "I promise we'll figure it out." But even as he said it, he knew Gerald Hutchins wasn't done. Men like that didn't give up easily. 2 days later, the sheriff rode out to the ranch. James knew Sheriff Tom Crawford, had known him for years. He was a fair man, honest, but he was also a man who followed the law. "James," Tom said, dismounting, We need to talk about your hired hand. Kate Ward, what about her? Gerald Hutchins filed a complaint. Says she stole from him before she ran off. Says he's got witnesses. Kate came out of the barn, saw the sheriff, and went still. James stepped between them. That's a lie and you know it, Tom. What I know doesn't matter. What matters is I've got a complaint and I've got to investigate. Miss Ward, I need you to come into town with me, answer some questions. If she goes into town, Hutchins will have her on a stage to Phoenix before nightfall, James said. I'll make sure that doesn't happen. But she's got to come in, James. That's the law. Kate stepped forward, putting a hand on James's arm. It's okay, I'll go. I didn't steal anything, so I've got nothing to hide. Kate, it's okay, she repeated, squeezing his arm. Sheriff Crawford seems like a fair man. I'll answer his questions and this will be over. But James had a bad feeling as he watched Kate ride off with the sheriff. He spent the rest of the day pacing, unable to focus on work. When evening came and she still wasn't back, he saddled Ace and rode into town himself. He found Tom Crawford at his office, looking frustrated. She's being held until the circuit judge can hear the case. Hutchins brought in 2 witnesses who swear they saw her take jewelry and cash from his home. They're lying, probably, but I can't just ignore sworn testimony. The judge will be here in 3 days. Until then, she stays in a cell. James wanted to put his fist through a wall. Can I see her? Tom hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Kate was in the back cell, sitting on the narrow cot with her arms wrapped around herself. When she saw James, she stood up and came to the bars. I'm sorry, I should have kept running. Don't say that. He reached through the bars and took her hands. This isn't your fault. Hutchins is desperate, that's all. He's making things up because he knows he's losing. What if the judge believes him? What if I end up in prison, or worse? What if he gets legal custody of me somehow and I have to marry him? That won't happen. I won't let it. You can't fight the law, James. Watch me. He squeezed her hands. Kate, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She searched his face, then nodded. I trust you. Good, hold on for 3 more days. I'm going to fix this. He left before Tom could kick him out, his mind already working through possibilities. He spent that night making a plan that was probably foolish, but was the only thing he could think of. At first light, he rode out hard and fast, heading south toward Phoenix. It took him a day and a half of brutal riding to reach the Ward Ranch, changing horses twice at waypoints. Kate's father, William Ward, was a big man with gray in his beard and suspicion in his eyes when James introduced himself. You're the one harboring my daughter, William said. I'm the one who gave her a job when she needed one, James corrected. And right now she's sitting in a jail cell in Prescott because Gerald Hutchins is a liar and you wouldn't listen to her. William's face went red. Now you listen here. No, you listen. James stepped closer, every inch of him radiating controlled fury. Your daughter overheard Hutchins and his brother planning to kill you for this ranch. She tried to tell you and you called her hysterical. She ran to save her own life, and now Hutchins has manufactured theft charges to force her back. So you can either keep believing that snake's lies, or you can help me save Kate before it's too late. That's impossible. Gerald is a respected businessman. Gerald is a con man who saw an opportunity in a widower with a profitable ranch and a marriageable daughter. Don't you think it's strange how eager he was to marry her, how quickly he wanted to finalize everything? He was setting you up, Mr. Ward. Kate saved both your lives when she ran. William sank down into a chair, his face going pale. She really heard them planning my death. That's what she told me, and I believe her. Your daughter is the bravest, most honest person I've ever met. She's also the best ranch hand I've ever hired, and she can track a mountain lion for 3 days without losing the trail. You raised a hell of a woman, Mr. Ward. Seems a shame you don't know her well enough to see that. William was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up at James with eyes that suddenly looked very old. What do you need from me? The truth. On paper. Signed and witnessed. Everything you know about your business dealings with Hutchins, any promises he made, any debts he claims you owe. I need ammunition for the judge, and I need it fast. William stood up. I'll do better than that. I'll come with you. They rode back together, stopping only to sleep a few hours and change horses. William told James everything along the way, about how Gerald had shown up a year ago with investment opportunities, about how he'd slowly insinuated himself into the ranch's finances, about how the marriage proposal had seemed like a generous offer to take care of Kate's future. "I thought I was doing right by her," William said heavily as they rode through the night. "Her mother would have known better. Susan always could see through people, but I'm just a rancher. I don't know business and lawyers and smooth-talking city men." "You know your daughter," James said. "That should have been enough." "Yeah," William agreed quietly. "It should have been." They reached Prescott the morning the circuit judge was scheduled to hear Kate's case. James left William at the sheriff's office giving his statement while he went to the courthouse. He found Kate being led in by a deputy, her wrists in shackles, her face pale but determined. When she saw him, relief flooded her features. "James, what did you do?" "Brought you a witness," he said as William came through the courthouse doors behind him. Kate's eyes went wide. "Papa." William approached his daughter slowly like he was afraid she might bolt. "Katie girl, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you." Kate's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "He was going to kill you, Papa, both of them, Gerald and his brother. I heard them." "I know." "I know, and I should have listened. I should have trusted you." William looked at the deputy. "Can I hug my daughter, or is that against the rules?" The deputy, a young man who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation, unlocked the shackles. Kate fell into her father's arms, sobbing, and William held her tight. "I'm going to fix this," he promised. "I swear to God, Katie, I'm going to make this right." The hearing was supposed to be quick, just a preliminary examination of evidence, but William Ward's testimony changed everything. He detailed his business relationship with Gerald Hutchins, the suspicious loans, the pressure to agree to the marriage, the way Gerald had isolated him from other advisors. He'd brought paperwork showing the debts Gerald claimed were fraudulent, contracts that had been altered after signing. Gerald's witnesses, when pressed by the judge, fell apart quickly. One admitted he'd been paid to lie, the other suddenly couldn't remember details. The theft charges dissolved like smoke. Judge Harrison, a stern man with white hair and sharp eyes, listened to everything and then fixed Gerald with a look that could melt iron. "Mr. Hutchins, it's my opinion that you've wasted this court's time with false accusations. The charges against Miss Ward are dismissed. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into your business practices. If I find evidence of fraud, you'll be the one sitting in a cell. Do I make myself clear?" Gerald's face was a mask of rage, but he nodded stiffly. "Perfectly clear, Your Honor. Then get out of my courtroom." Gerald left, his remaining men trailing behind him. Kate sagged with relief and James caught her elbow to steady her. "It's over," he said. "You're free." She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with tears and something else, something that made his heart race. "Thanks to you." "And your father?" William cleared his throat. "Katie, I know I've got no right to ask, but would you come home? Come back to the ranch, I need you, and not just as a partner in business. I need my daughter, I've been lost without you." Kate looked between her father and James could see the conflict in her face. He knew what he should do, what the right thing was. He should tell her to go, to rebuild her relationship with her father, to reclaim her place at the ranch she'd grown up on. But he couldn't make the words come out. Kate must have seen something in his face because she smiled, a little sad, a little amused. "Papa, I love you, I forgive you, but my home is in Prescott now. I have a job and a place and," she glanced at James, "and reasons to stay." William followed her gaze and something knowing crossed his face. "I see. Well then, I suppose I'll have to visit more often." "I'd like that," Kate said softly. They left the courthouse together, stepping out into the bright Arizona sunshine. Kate tilted her face up to the sky, breathing deep. "I can't believe it's really over." "It's over," James confirmed. He wanted to reach for her hand but felt suddenly shy with William right there. William, who was apparently more observant than James gave him credit for, chuckled. "I need to find a hotel for the night, get some rest before I ride back. I'll come by your ranch tomorrow to say goodbye, Katie. That'll give you two a chance to talk." He tipped his hat and walked off, leaving James and Kate standing in the street. They looked at each other for a moment, then Kate started laughing. "Was my father just giving us permission?" "I think so." "For what?" "This," James said, and kissed her properly this time, right there in the middle of town where anyone could see. Kate kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, and it felt like coming home after a long, hard journey. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kate was grinning. "So do I still have a job, or has this changed things?" "Oh, you definitely still have a job." "I need someone to help me run that ranch." James took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "But maybe we should talk about making the arrangement more permanent. James Sullivan, are you proposing to me in the middle of the street after I've just gotten out of jail?" "Would you prefer I wait for a more romantic moment?" Kate pretended to consider it. "No, I think this is perfect actually, very us. Practical and unplanned and slightly chaotic." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes. But I'm keeping my job and my half of running the ranch. I'm not marrying you to become some delicate flower who sits around looking pretty. Kate, I've seen you wrestle a calf to the ground for branding. I know exactly what I'm getting into." She laughed and kissed him again, and James felt something in his chest that had been locked tight for 2 years finally open up. It wasn't that he loved Rebecca any less. It was that he'd learned there was room in his heart for more than one kind of love, more than one kind of happiness. They got married a week later in a simple ceremony at the church in Prescott. William gave Kate away, tears streaming down his weathered face. Sheriff Tom Crawford stood up as James's best man, and the minister's wife served as witness. Kate wore a simple blue dress she'd bought with her first month's wages, and James wore his best shirt with his hair slicked back. When the minister asked if anyone objected, the whole congregation held its breath. But Gerald Hutchins had left Arizona Territory 2 days earlier, one step ahead of fraud charges. The judge's investigation had uncovered enough evidence to issue a warrant, and Gerald had apparently decided Mexico was a better option than an Arizona prison. James and Kate said their vows clearly and firmly, promising to love and honor each other, to work side by side, to build a life together in this hard, beautiful land. When the minister pronounced them married, James kissed his wife like it was the first and last kiss of his life, and Kate kissed him back just as fiercely. They had a small celebration at the ranch that evening, just William, Sheriff Tom, and a few neighbors. But after everyone left, James and Kate stood on the porch together, looking out at the sunset painting the mountains gold and crimson. "I should move one of these chairs," James said, eyeing the 2 rockers. "Make room for a bench or something." "Don't you dare," Kate said, settling into what had been Rebecca's chair and was now hers. "I like these chairs, they suit us." James sat down in his own chair, reaching over to take Kate's hand. "Yeah, I guess they do." They rocked together in silence for a while, watching the day end and the stars begin to emerge. James thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, hollowed out by grief, going through the motions of living without really being alive. He thought about the woman who'd shown up exhausted and desperate and brave, sitting in the chair he'd made for a ghost. "I'm glad you sat in that chair without an invite," James said quietly. Kate squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you let me stay." The years that followed were good ones, the kind built on hard work and honest affection. Kate proved to be not just a skilled ranch hand but a natural horsewoman who could gentle even the most difficult mounts. Together, she and James expanded the ranch, buying up adjacent land when it became available, building their herd William visited often, rebuilding his relationship with his daughter piece by piece. He and James developed a respect for each other that eventually grew into genuine friendship. When William had a stroke 3 years after the wedding, Kate and James brought him to live with them, converting the barn's upper loft into a comfortable apartment where he could still feel independent, but never be far from help. Kate's first pregnancy came as a surprise in their 4th year of marriage. She worked right up until the day her water broke, insisting that cattle didn't birth themselves and neither would this baby if she just sat around waiting. James was terrified through the whole labor, pacing outside the bedroom while the midwife worked, convinced he was going to lose another woman he loved. But Kate was strong, and when the midwife finally called him in, he found his wife propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted and grinning like she'd just won a prize. In her arms was a squalling, red-faced baby boy with a shock of dark hair. "Meet your son," Kate said, her voice hoarse. "I was thinking we could call him William after Papa, or maybe James after you, or we could pick something entirely new. What do you think?" James sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny person in Kate's arms, his son. He had a son. "William James Sullivan," he said. "Call him Liam for short." "Perfect," Kate agreed and placed the baby in James's arms. Liam was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Rebecca Susan, after both the women who'd shaped their lives. And 2 years after that, another son, Samuel, who came screaming into the world during a thunderstorm and never really quieted down after that. The ranch prospered. James and Kate worked it together, their partnership as strong in the fields as it was in their home. They argued sometimes, both of them too stubborn for their own good, but they never went to bed angry. They laughed more often than they fought, their house full of the sounds of children and life and love. William lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren born, bouncing them on his knee and telling them stories about their mother when she was a wild girl who could track a mountain lion. He passed peacefully in his sleep when Liam was 6, Rebecca 4, and Samuel 2, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a view of the mountains he'd loved. Kate grieved deeply but quietly, the way she did everything. James held her through it, and their children, sensing their mother's sadness, were extra gentle for weeks, bringing her wildflowers and interesting rocks and clumsy hugs. The years turned. Liam grew tall and serious, taking after his father. Rebecca was wild and fearless, always climbing things she shouldn't, and coming home with scraped knees and triumphant grins. Samuel was the charmer, able to talk his way out of any trouble with dimples and dramatic apologies. James and Kate grew older together, their hands becoming weathered and calloused, silver threading through their hair. But every evening, no matter how hard the day had been, they sat together in those 2 rocking chairs on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. "Do you ever think about that day?" Kate asked one evening when Liam was 16 and learning to run the ranch, when Rebecca was 14 and determined to train horses, when Samuel was 12 and already sweet-talking the neighbor girls. "Which day?" James asked, though he knew. "The day I sat in this chair without an invite," James smiled, reaching for her hand the way he'd done thousands of times over the years. "Every day, best thing that ever happened to me, you being presumptuous." "I was desperate," Kate corrected, but she was smiling too. "You were brave." "You still are." They rocked in silence for a moment, the comfortable quiet of 2 people who'd spent decades learning each other. From inside the house came the sounds of their children arguing about something, Liam trying to be the voice of reason while Rebecca and Samuel formed an alliance of chaos. "We did good," Kate said softly. "Yeah," James agreed, squeezing her hand. "We did real good." More years passed, marked by weddings and grandchildren, by seasons of plenty and seasons of drought, by the slow, steady rhythm of a life well lived. Liam married a schoolteacher from town and gave them 3 grandchildren. Rebecca married a horse trader from California and had twins. Samuel, true to form, fell dramatically in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher and gave them 4 more grandchildren to spoil. The ranch passed primarily to Liam, who had his father's steady temperament and his mother's skill with horses. But Rebecca and Samuel stayed close, their children running wild across the property just like they had, learning to ride before they could properly walk. James and Kate, their hair gone silver, their bodies bent with age but not broken, still sat in those 2 rocking chairs every evening. They'd offered to give the chairs to the children, to the grandchildren, but everyone knew those chairs were sacred. They'd been built with grief and claimed with courage and sanctified by decades of love. They belonged to James and Kate and always would. When James died at 78, his heart simply giving out one morning as he fed the horses, Kate grieved like she'd lost half of herself because she had. But she didn't rage against it. They'd had 35 years together, which was 35 years more than that day in the street when she'd been running for her life and he'd been half dead from grief. She still sat in her rocking chair every evening, though James's chair stayed empty now. Their children and grandchildren worried about her, about the loneliness, but Kate told them she wasn't lonely. She could still feel James beside her, rocking in his chair, holding her hand across the space between them. "I kept my promise," she told him one evening, speaking to the empty chair. "I stayed. I built a life here. I loved you with everything I had." The wind picked up, rustling through the pines, and Kate smiled. She rocked slowly, remembering the cowboy who'd built 2 chairs, using only one until she'd been brave enough or desperate enough to claim the other. She remembered his strong hands and his quiet voice and the way he'd looked at her like she was worth fighting for. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty chair, to the memory, to the man who'd saved her by letting her save herself. "Thank you for everything." Kate lived another 5 years, her mind sharp even as her body weakened. She died in her sleep at 82, surrounded by her children and grandchildren in the house she'd made a home with James. They buried her next to him on the hill where William rested, the 3 of them overlooking the ranch and the mountains and the endless Arizona sky. And on the porch of the house, still standing after all the years, sat 2 rocking chairs, empty now but never forgotten. Liam's oldest son, William James Sullivan II, who everyone called Jamie, eventually took over the main house. He was a thoughtful young man of 23 who'd grown up on stories about his grandparents. He carefully maintained those rocking chairs, replacing worn slats when necessary, but keeping them as original as possible. One evening, he was sitting on the porch steps watching the sunset when a young woman came walking up the road. She looked exhausted, her dress dusty, her hair coming loose from its pins. There was a determined set to her jaw that reminded Jamie of the stories he'd heard about his grandmother. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "I'm looking for work. I can ride, rope, and break horses. I'm good with cattle and I don't mind hard labor. Do you need any help?" Jamie stood up, studying her. There was a desperation in her eyes that tugged at something in his chest. "What's your name?" "Anna Martinez," she said, lifting her chin. "And before you say no because I'm a woman, you should know my grandmother helped run a ranch in New Mexico for 40 years. I know what I'm doing." Jamie smiled, thinking about his grandmother showing up on this same porch all those years ago, claiming a rocking chair without permission and changing everything. Some stories, he thought, were meant to repeat themselves. "We always need good help," he said. "Room and board included." "There's a spare room inside." He gestured to the 2 rocking chairs. "And after work, if you'd like, there's a seat on the porch. Fair warning, though, those chairs have a history." Anna looked at the chairs, then back at Jamie, something shifting in her expression. "What kind of history?" "The kind where 2 stubborn people found each other when they needed it most. The kind where a woman sat in a chair without an invite and a man decided to let her stay. The kind that lasted a lifetime." Anna smiled, and Jamie felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "Sounds like a good history." "Yeah," Jamie agreed. "It really is." The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the 2 rocking chairs sat silent on the porch, waiting. They'd been built with grief, claimed with courage, and blessed with love. They'd held countless conversations, witnessed decades of sunsets, and cradled 2 people who'd found each other against all odds. Now they waited again, patient and permanent, ready for the next chapter of the story they'd helped begin so many years ago. Because some things, the important things, the things built with care and maintained with love, those things endured. Those things lasted. And in a land as hard and beautiful as the Arizona Territory, Where survival required strength and love required courage, two rocking chairs on a porch were more than furniture. They were a legacy, a promise, a reminder that even in the wildest places, home was wherever you found someone worth sitting beside, watching the sunset and building a life. The story of James and Kate, the cowboy who built two rocking chairs and the woman who claimed one without asking, became a legend in their family, passed down through generations. It was told to children at bedtime, to young couples starting out, to anyone who needed to hear that love could bloom in the hardest soil, that courage could be as simple as sitting in a chair you hadn't been invited to use, and that sometimes the best things in life came from being brave enough to stay when everything told you to run. And on quiet evenings when the wind was right and the sunset particularly beautiful, some said you could still see them. James and Kate Sullivan rocking slowly in their chairs, hands clasped across the space between them, watching the day end and the stars emerge, together for all time in the place they'd built with sweat and hope and abiding, unshakable love.